Boomtown exists in its present form because, more than anything else, Rusty Davies was so impressed with Annette Badland's performance in the Aliens of London World War III two-parter that he decided to bring blonde Felfotch Pasmere Day Slitheen, alias Margaret Bain, back for a return engagement. So many of the logical problems with this episode fall away if one keeps in mind that Badland's return was an overriding goal for this episode, rather than a natural byproduct of the storytelling process. Although, thematically it doesn't really make a lick of sense that Margaret Blaine could, in the space of 6 months, become Lord Mayor of Cardiff, and ram through a major proposal to build a nuclear power station in the heart of the city, all without so much as having her photograph taken or attracting any attention from London, especially as the previous two-parter indicated that Harriet Jones would soon become Prime Minister. Therefore it doesn't make an ounce of sense that Margaret could become Mayor of Cardiff. Surely Harriet would recognise her from their previous meeting in the previous two-parter, and therefore her plan would be scuppered before it even commenced. It's problems such as these that really come to the forefront immediately. Admittedly, Davies does win points for audacity, with his attempt to paper over the last logical gap, as Margaret takes on the local forces when she says London couldn't care less about what happens to Wales. It's an open question why Blonde doesn't just leave behind the Margaret skin suit, as one of her Slitheen brothers swap bodies in Aliens of London, and hide inside someone else who isn't potentially a prime suspect in the recent alien invasion. Although at least Margaret never actually appeared in any of the newscasts in her debut appearances. But then, that all ignores the essential point. If Blonde had changed bodies, Annette Badland couldn't have returned, and I'm glad out of all of the Slitheen to actually have escaped, that it was her. By this stage of Series 1, Christopher Eccleston has made peace with the role, and is delivering some near-on flawless performances, especially in the previous two-parter prior to this episode. However, this story throws a mixture of comedy and drama at him, and whilst he is only cut out for the latter earlier in the season, he has now perfected the former. The Doctor is such hard work, but he's worth it, he says while flirting cheekily with Jack. I hear that many say they don't actually like this scene, but I'd argue to the contrary, as it's some necessary character development between the two, and it's generally a funny exchange from RTD, so needless to say, I enjoy it.
Aw, sweet. Look at these two. How come I never get any of that?
Buy me a drink first.
It's such hard work.
But worth it.
Talking of Captain Jack, I do feel he's a little sidelined in this episode, and when he does make an appearance, he doesn't really make much of an impact. A lot of the time he is simply there to point out specific elements of the episode, just like when we first see the extrapolator, and he simply sprouts a load of incomprehensible technobabble at us. It's a real shame, because he does have some really interesting dynamics with the other characters here, but John Barrowman doesn't really get enough to sink his teeth into, and therefore is sidelined. Moreover, it is wonderful to see the Ninth Doctor and his friends laughing in the cafe. His life is just starting to come together again before the devastating event in the next story. Later, it is very amusing to see Eccleston's slight eyebrow raise when Margaret drops her teacup, which is priceless, simply priceless. Much too is the chase sequence that follows. The sequence is simply played strictly for laughs. The exchange up above is one of my favourite gags of the Eccleston era. There's never any question that the Doctor can outwit Margaret and anticipate her every escaped attempt, at least until the moment that her real trap is.
Hello, I've come to see the Lord Mayor.
Have you got an appointment?
No, just an old friend passing by, bit of a surprise. Can't wait to see her face.
Well, she's just having a cup of tea.
Just go in there and tell her the Doctor would like to see her.
Doctor Who?
Just the Doctor. Tell her exactly that. The Doctor.
Hang on a tick. The Lord Mayor says thank you for popping by. She'd love to have a chat, but she's up to her eyes in paperwork. Perhaps if we could make an appointment for next week.
She's climbing out the window, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
Mickey the idiot.
Oh, be fair, she's not exactly going to outrun us, is she?
She's got a teleport. That's cheating. Now we're never going to get her.
Oh, the Doctor's very good at teleports.
Davies' script purposefully treats the plot as an afterthought, All the better to focus on our attention on the real crux of the episode, the Doctor and Margaret's dinner date. Davies takes this opportunity to reflect on the Doctor's lifestyle, and we've never had such a harsh light thrown on his methods and his carefree way as he walks away from whatever situation he has conjured up that week. It's not always like this, having to wait and deal with the consequences of his actions. Margaret is spot on when she says he is always the first to leave. Remember all those Troughton stories when he was out the door as soon as the crisis is averted, and the mopping up is to begin? How strong is the Doctor's stomach? Can he sit with the person he's going to kill and take supper? All this introspection is a very welcome addition to the new series, and it's some really poignant stuff from showrunner Davies. What I love is that these ideas are tossed into the air, the finger is pointed, but the episodes don't come down on either side. We're left to consider what Boomtown says about the Doctor, and to make up our own minds. His happy-go-lucky lifestyle leaves devastation in its wake, always on the move because he dare not look back. Playing with so many lives, he might as well be a god. All of this psychological evaluation felt fresh and interesting in Series 1, but too much could be a dangerous thing. There would be times over the next 10 series where I'd fear that the show is focusing so much on how the Doctor is feeling that it forgets to let him enjoy the adventures they're having. But that's for later. As I say at this stage, this was a fantastic peek into the psyche of one of the most closed-off Doctors. These issues can all be rationalised away, and pretty much every Doctor Who story requires some amount of rationalisation, but Boomtown asks for significantly more suspension of disbelief than your typical Doctor Who episode, and we haven't even reached the ending yet. The story's closest equivalent is Father's Day, which similarly deprioritises the strict logic of its narrative in order to focus on the personal story between Rose and her father. The precise mechanics of the Reapers and the Paradox are underexplained at best, but that's because they are beside the real point of the story. The handling of the Doctor in both stories is a good clue. Much as the Doctor matter-of-factly told Rose in the earlier episode that he could do about anything, here, he and his growing team of companions make short work of Margaret. The discussion of the morality of the Doctor's actions in the dinner scene could quite happily have gone on for much longer than it actually does. The first of the two major exchanges at the restaurant addresses the Doctor's uncomfortable place as enforcer of the law. There are alternatives here that aren't even considered. Even if Raxacorico Falapatorius is unacceptably barbaric in its punishment, there are surely other, more civilized worlds that would gladly incarcerate Acidadine, possibly even including the Earth. But what really matters here is that the Doctor lowers his defences enough to actually ask Margaret what else he can do. As Jack warns him, back in the TARDIS, Margaret is trying to get into his head, and it's actually when the Doctor thinks he has Margaret properly sized up as a killer, with an occasional arbitrary capacity for mercy, that his dining partner manages the most piercing blow. The viewer doesn't need to accept Margaret's argument that compares her own killer's mercy to that of the Doctor, because the really significant action of the scene is happening in Christopher Eccleston's eyes. Badland's own performance makes it clear that Margaret is trying every line of attack she can to try and weaken the Doctor's resolve. It doesn't work necessarily, but the Doctor realises he can't entirely rebut the notion that he, for all his good intentions, a destructive, even capricious force in so many lives. The problem I have, however, is how all this fantastic dialogue in the dinner scene is undermined later on, when it turns out that it was all meaningless and was just a cunning plan all along. If it doesn't ruin it entirely, it certainly puts a dampener on it when viewed in retrospect of the ending, and for me that is a real great shame. Unfortunately, Boomtown couldn't realistically have stayed in that restaurant for the remainder of its running time, because something resembling of a plot has to kick back in eventually. Something resembling a plot is about right, since the climax is pretty much gibberish. The fact that Margaret had a nefarious backup plan all along doesn't entirely undermine her earlier attempts at contrition, as I've said, but it does muddy the waters that have already not been established as being very clear. The actual resolution, in which Margaret stares into the heart of the TARDIS and is regressed to an egg, is one of the strangest, most random endings in the show's history. Again, going back to Father's Day, not every plot element in that episode makes as much sense as perhaps it should have, but the core story, Rose's rash decision to save her father, and then her father's decision to sacrifice himself to save everything, makes emotional sense. It's a story whose resolution feels right, because there's a natural outgrowth of the relationship built up between Rose and Pete over the course of the story. It doesn't help that the actual resolution to this faux moral quandary is a deus ex machina, which allows the Doctor to do precisely what the episode is accusing him of doing, avoiding the repercussions of his actions. Whereas before he would have had to personally deliver the Slitheen to serve her death sentence, a heretofore unrevealed wish-granting property of the TARDIS regresses her to infancy, allowing the Doctor to dodge the messy business of being a second-hand executioner. All the questions raised by the episode, weak as they may be, are dropped by the way of a convenient magic trick. The Doctor doesn't have to make the critical decision, he doesn't have to resolve the issue at all. The Slitheen's actual plot to destroy the world is a little more than an afterthought, so the highlight of the story becomes the Mickey and Rose sequence. Admirably acted and ably scripted, The scenes allow Mickey to grow beyond his two-dimensional role as a jealous ex and show Rose showing some regret for what she's left behind in embracing the Doctor's lifestyle. It's rather sad, then, that the best use of the Mickey character and his final send-off appears after the series has already said goodbye to him twice before, and before yet another final appearance in Parting of the Ways, and many more appearances to come. You can't actually miss someone or take seriously the prospect of missing someone if they never go away. Overall, much like the Unicorn and the Wasp later on in Series 4, what we have here is a tried and tested action director in Joe Ahan turning his hand to something lighter and more character-based, and doing an okay job of it. It's an episode that juggles dialogue concerning consequences, capital punishment, and the pain of being left behind when people get on with their lives without you, and examines the Ninth Doctor better than any other episode in the season. Christopher Eccleston is a revelation in a story that shows how the Doctor's life is all coming together again. His trio of companions are a delight, and it is rare to see him smiling quite so much. But he's also allowed some quieter moments, a chance to examine the Doctor's carefree attitude to adventure when there are so many lives at stake. His scenes with Annette Badland manage to be very funny and extremely poignant, which is a tough act to pull off, but he does it. Who cares if there isn't the budget to produce something more blockbusting? Davies returns to the tried and tested method of the classic series and uses the lack of money as an excuse to give the episode that more meaning. Although it is certainly a filler episode, it is still a fun little romp nonetheless, and that is why I give this episode a 7 out of 10.